to say that the microcomputers coming on the market were only really for playing games, and that most people would never find serious uses for them. Well, over the next 10 programs, we'll be seeing just what can be done with micros and looking at the principles of how you can use them yourself. That's why we're calling this series Making the Most of the Micro. Richard Gomm suffers from cerebral palsy. He can't speak, he can't walk, his limb movements are unpredictable, but he can control the movement of his head. His disabilities, though, haven't prevented him pursuing an academic career. He's studying for a PhD in philosophy at Swansea. And it was the agony of writing long philosophical dissertations using an ordinary electric typewriter that first led him to consider how a computer could help him.
It's just you and your Uncle Popeye.
The Micro has opened up a whole new world for Richard Gomm. He's now writing software to help other disabled people extend their abilities through computers. And he also claims to have discovered one of the most important laws in computing, Gomm's law. Well, Richard Gombe isn't the first to discover that computers aren't quite as foolproof as the adverts promise. But through that film, we've already seen a few of the jobs they can do, and jobs that are increasing in variety all the time. Now, you may have a machine of your own, or you may be thinking of buying one. And there's a confusing array of them, and the adverts are full of technical jargon, which we hope to explain. Well, although they're all similar, there are many small differences between machines, and we can't look at every one in detail, so for much of the time, we'll be using the BBC Micro. Well, with me today is John Coll, who wrote the user's guide to this machine and knows much more about it than I do. John, this is a fairly simple layout, but it's fairly standard for most micros.
That's right. It's got the three elements that you expect to find. The computer itself, a colour monitor so that we can look at the output pictures from the computer, and a cassette recorder for playing the programs back into the computer.
Well, I haven't got a monitor. I use an ordinary television set. What's the difference?
Well, that's fine. You can use that quite well, but with a colour monitor you get a much sharper and crisper picture, particularly when you're using colour graphics. It shows things up a lot more clearly.
But you can't use it to get television pictures, I suppose.
That's right, that's right. Now, both of those, the television and the colour monitor, plug in at the back. And in fact, that's where the ordinary domestic television set plugs in. The black and white monitor can go in there, and the colour monitor plugs into that socket. The next socket along here is used for plugging a printer in, or you can plug in a connection to a telephone line so that you can connect to satellite circuits and so on. An ordinary domestic cassette recorder plugs in there so that you can load programs. Then there are a few more up here. This socket is where you plug in games paddles, things like that. And these two at the end are special connections so that we can connect the studio equipment in and get a television picture from the computer.
Well, apart from those last two, most of the other ones are fairly standard you find in most micros.
Absolutely. Very normal indeed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's load a program in. We've got a cassette here, an ordinary audio cassette, and we can load the program that's stored on there into the computer. So we type load demo 1 and press the return key, and then start the recorder playing. And in a moment, that will start a program loading from the cassette recorder into the computer. In fact, it's just started now.
What's the significance of those numbers?
Well, those numbers are rather like pages in a book. We're on page 3 at the moment, and each page has got a certain number of characters stored on it, about 250 characters on each page. The program is in fact stored as a set of audio tones or whistles. We can listen to those if we pull out this plug.
I always feel confident listening to that because it makes sure it's working, something's happening.
That's right, you can actually hear it. You may have heard just two different notes, a high note and a low